Once upon a time, there was a hero named Perseus, okay? And I know it's not a name that you would expect to hear in this series, okay? But bear with me, because this is a tale of heroism that you might recognize, okay? Even if you do know anything about Greek mythology, okay? See, Perseus' father was actually Zeus himself, disguised as a man named Perseus. But unfortunately, Perseus didn't know that his dad was Zeus, and he also didn't know that he was destined to become a great hero one day. In fact, when we first meet him, he's just a regular old baby who lives with his mom, a queen named Danae, trapped inside of a tower guarded by 500 soldiers. Okay. And they're trapped there because, you see, before Perseus was born, his grandfather, King Perseus, had heard a prophecy that said that he would be killed by his grandson. So, out of fear of what the future could hold, he locked both Perseus and Danae in the tower. However, shortly after, Zeus came down from Mount Olympus in disguise, snuck into the tower, and impregnated Danae. And soon enough, Perseus was born. But of course, given that Zeus had a history of forgetting that he did stuff like this, it took quite a while for him to remember that he actually has a son with a woman who's trapped inside of a tower. And in the meantime, the only person who was taking care of young Perseus was his mother, who did her best to shield him from the world by raising him without telling him anything about the outside world at all. She just made up stories about dragons and monsters and told him that those were the things that lay beyond their walls. And so Perseus grew up thinking that the world was a dangerous place. Since Perseus was half mortal and half god, he was blessed with super strength, speed, and stamina, not to mention immortality. So it was long before he got bored living in a tower and decided to venture out into the world to see if he could find any adventures. Now, when Danae heard that her son had gone out into the world, she started freaking out because she was afraid that he would get hurt. So she ran over to the window, looked around to see if she could spot him, and then called out to the wind gods, begging them to bring him back to her safely. Now, hearing his mom's cries, Perseus stopped what he was doing and turned around to go back to the tower. But right before he did, he was spotted by some passing sailors who offered him a ride back home. And Perseus accepted because he was really tired, and he was also curious to see what life was like out there in the world. So he set off with the sailors, but unfortunately, they weren't nice men at all. In fact, they had lured him away from his tower under false pretenses so that they could sacrifice him to their god, Poseidon. However, being the immortal demigod that he was, Perseus was able to fight back against his attackers and kill every single one of them. And then, as a reward for his bravery, the sailor's boat washed ashore on an island where a king named Polydex ruled over the people. And I know that you probably think that Perseus should have realized that another king wanting to befriend him meant that he had bad intentions, but he was still a kid, and he didn't know any better. So he went along with Polydex's plan to let him stay in the castle and live with his family. But unbeknownst to Perseus, Polydex was just waiting for the perfect opportunity to trick him and get rid of him. That opportunity came when a messenger arrived from the neighboring kingdom of Cestus. You see, years ago, the people of Cestus had been cursed to turn anyone who laid eyes on them into stone. Okay. And this was because their queen had been turned into a stone statue by the Gorgon Medusa, who you probably already know was a monster with snakes for hair whose gaze could turn people to stone. And since nobody wanted to risk going anywhere near the city of Cestus, they had sent a plea for help to Polydex's kingdom. And as a result, Polydex was assembling a team of heroes to go take down Medusa. He asked Perseus to join them, knowing full well that he would end up dying. Before he could leave, Perseus' mom found out about the mission and begged her son to refuse the invitation because she was certain that it was a trap. However, Perseus didn't listen to her, and he decided to go on the quest anyway. And as a parting gift, Polydex gave him a polished bronze shield which doubled as a mirror. Now, when Perseus heard that, he thought it was a bit strange that Polydex would gift his son-in-law with a tool that could be used to fight against him. But again, he was still kind of a kid, so he didn't think much of it. He just put on the shield and headed out to confront Medusa. Now, traveling with them were two other heroes named Heracles and Autolycus, as well as Minerva, who had taken the form of a bird, and Hermes, who had taken the form of a satyr. And they all traveled for many days until they finally reached the Rock of the Giants, which is where Medusa lived. As soon as they got there, though, Autolycus panicked because he was scared, so Heracles punched him in the gut and knocked him out. Then Heracles turned to Perseus and told him that he had to face Medusa alone, because he was the one who had asked Polydex to go on this quest. So Perseus understood that if he wanted to prove himself, he had to do it alone. So he thanked Hermes and Athena for helping him get there, and then charged forward towards Medusa's lair. Now, as he approached the cave, Athena told Hermes that he had to distract Medusa for just a few moments so that Perseus could sneak inside. So Hermes transformed back into his true form, walked up to the mouth of the cave, and played a song on his flute that was so enchanting that Medusa couldn't help but come outside and dance along with him. And as she was dancing, Perseus crept inside, found her nest, and waited patiently for the right moment to strike. It wasn't long before Medusa exited the cave to take a break from dancing, but as soon as she stepped outside, Perseus popped out from behind a rock and raised his mirrored shield so that he could reflect Medusa's gaze back at herself. Now, being immortal, Medusa was unable to turn Perseus to stone, but she did panic at the sight of her own face reflected in his shield, so she tried to attack him with her sword. But Hermes was there to protect him, and Athena was there to guide him. So with their help, Perseus was able to dodge Medusa's attacks and stab her multiple times in the neck with his sword. After getting stabbed a couple times, she realized that she was no match for these gods and heroes. So she surrendered and begged them for mercy. Athena wasn't having it, saying that once a Gorgon, always a Gorgon. So she ordered Perseus to kill her right then and there. And even though he didn't want to, Perseus knew that he had no choice. So he pulled his sword back, took a deep breath, and plunged it into Medusa's heart. Now, as soon as her life force left her body, her snake hair turned to gold. Her eyes lost their monstrous glow, and she reverted back to her true form, which was that of a very beautiful woman. Perseus was so shocked by this that he almost dropped his sword, but luckily he caught himself and regained his composure. Then Athena told him to grab Medusa's severed head, which still retained all of its powers, and bring it back to the ship where they would sail back home. And so Perseus did just that. When they got back to camp, Heracles was overjoyed to see that his friend had returned victorious, and Athena congratulated him on his bravery and quick thinking. But even though they were celebrating, Perseus knew that he still had to deal with the consequences of slaying such a powerful monster. And the first consequence was that Medusa's sisters, who were also Gorgons, were now looking for revenge. To prepare for their arrival, Perseus and the others built a wall of bronze to protect themselves. Then they waited for the sisters to show up. When they did, Athena told Perseus to use Medusa's head and scare them away, and he did exactly that. The head's petrifying stare was so powerful that it turned the sisters to stone before they even had a chance to fight back. After sending the sisters away, Perseus and the others celebrated once more. But they knew that they had to keep moving because Polydex would be arriving soon to claim Medusa's head for himself. So they sailed away to an island where Perseus left the Gorgons' heads in the care of some nymphs, then continued on to seek out his mother. On the way though, his boat was caught in a storm, and Hermes helped them navigate through the chaos. Once they got to the next island, Perseus left the boat again and hiked up to a nearby temple. And in gratitude for Hermes' help, he gifted the god with one of Medusa's golden sandals. After that, he continued on his journey and eventually returned home, where he was reunited with his mother. And that's where our story ends. You know, whenever I hear the phrase, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, I always think of Medusa. Because if Athena could have just seen past her monstrous exterior and rude demeanor, maybe she would have shown Medusa some compassion instead of turning her into a Gorgon. If you want to hear more stories about Medusa, I'd recommend checking out my series called Camp Half-Blood Confidential, which is available on a subscription platform. Anyways, that's all for this week, and as always, I'll see you next time.